It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
And so even when my mum wasn't able to be there for me, there were always adults in my life who just literally loved on me.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Every Tuesday on the Happy Families podcast, we discuss a listener question. You can send your questions through to podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. G'day, this is Justin Coulson. I'm here with Kylie, my wife and mum to our 6 kids. Hey, Kylie, you pointed this out to me. It's been a while since we've had a look at how things are going with our reviews on Apple Podcasts. And I've got to say, there's been like nearly 100 reviews pop up there that we haven't talked about. We don't blow our own trumpet a lot, but I think that we need to just today. Is that okay? Can I read just the two latest reviews that have landed? Because people are giving us 5 stars and saying we're helping.
I'd love to hear them.
Okay, so this one comes from Mitch Paulie ZM, who says, game changer, 5 stars. I'm so grateful we live in a time where we have so many resources for parenting, but it can be really daunting and challenging to navigate with all the conflicting information. The Happy Families podcasts are humbling and insightful with expert advice and real family stories. It's relatable and evidence-based. My husband and I are able to self-reflect and back our parenting decisions with expert advice and feel less like headless chooks. I love that. Making it less daunting and less alone on our parenting journey. I truly believe this podcast has helped our family become more intentional with our time together and feel like a true team.
That was awesome. What's the second one?
Okay, the second one comes from somebody called Barbecue Tray, BBQ Tray, new father, 5 stars. This podcast has helped me immensely with becoming a new parent. It helps me feel confident in my ability to make good decisions when dealing with difficult situations. It's been an anchor that helps weather the storms. So good.
Oh, I love that.
So we would love to just get to 600. It's only 8 more reviews. If you have not yet rated and reviewed this podcast, can you jump on Apple Podcasts and do that for us? Like literally in the app you're on, all you've got to do is push the review button and it will give you the chance to give us 5 stars and say something nice about us. We might even mention you on the podcast sometime next year because that's about how often I check it. But I'd love to get to 600. I'm actually going to check every day for the next couple of days and see if we can get to 600. Now, as I mentioned at the start, we always do a listener question on a Tuesday. And Kylie, the one that I'm going to share with you is a little bit complex, but it applies to so many people. I also need to highlight, though, with this particular episode, some of the things that I'm going to say are going to touch on some sore points, some sensitivities, and I hate to say them. I hasten to add that I'm saying them only to be helpful and only because that's what the data tell us, not because this is how it is for every single person. So the question comes from somebody who would just like to be known as Kate. She's preferring to be anonymous, so we're just going to call her Kate. And she basically says, growing up, one of my parents had schizophrenia, which had a huge impact on my life. The question, though, is not about schizophrenia, and I'm not qualified to answer that. That's not my area of expertise. What she does ask, though, is for those of us who had an absent parent or lack of a parent figure, is there any research or observations on what key skills they may be missing and therefore need to lean into? Are there parenting or general skills that I'm likely to struggle with and should be more aware of as I try to do better for my family? And I read that and I thought, we've got to talk about this because you and I, fortunately, were raised by both of our biological parents. We were very lucky in that regard, but there are so many kids who are not being raised by both parents and they've had disrupted family lives.
But I think the acknowledgement is that it's not so much about whether or not you were raised with 2 parents. There's an acknowledgement there that whether having an absent parent, so we can grow up in a house with 2 people, but were they present in your life?
Well, that's right, because in this case,
the reality is that for every single one of us, there will be a story. There will be deficits in our lives because the big people in our space growing up weren't able to meet our needs in specific ways. And we can look at our own lives and see those deficits and recognize that they impact our lives. But if that's where our focus is, I really think that we're never, ever going to feel whole. We're going to feel less than. I think the emphasis has to be moving forward. What are my strengths? Because we've all got them. We're not going to be great at everything. And so much of the deficits, the weakness in our lives, some of it will be just a result of who we are as individuals. Some of it will be as a result of how we were brought up. But the reality is And the research, you've told me this so many times, the research highlights that the more we focus on our strengths, the happier we are, the better we are as individuals. And those deficits, those weaknesses, they kind of come along with us. And as we focus on our strengths, we can actually strengthen those.
Yeah, I love that. We all have gaps, but we also all have strengths. While you were talking, I remembered a story and I've done a quick Google on it because I want to share it. It comes from the Adam Grant TED podcast called Rethinking with Adam Grant, and he's talking with IBM CEO Ginny Rometty.
My father abandoned our family when I was young. I was 16, my brothers and sisters were younger, and I happened to walk into the garage and I heard the conversation. Just a coincidence. I heard him tell my mother he could care less what happened to her or any of us, and she could work out on the street for all he cared. For me in my life, that set the bar for bad, that nothing could ever be that bad again. So anything from here now looks really good to me. And that feeling is really freeing and liberating, because I would go on in life to do really hard things and in the moment think, oh my God, if this doesn't work, I would always remember it's never as bad as that was.
And then she says this, Kylie, this is the clincher, CEO of IBM.
Part of my shield would be, we could never cause my mom trouble. So we had a study. It's like, we can't cause her problems. Do your homework, because she's got enough. And my sisters and brothers are all very successful as well. My mom will go, what did I ever do? And we learned hard work took you to a better place.
So what's going on here is family structure, not great. Family function, not great. But these kids have looked at the situation and said, we've got to be awesome. Now that's kind of bringing me around to the first main thing that I wanted to say, and that is that individual differences matter. And you kind of said that as well. It's me re-emphasizing your point. It depends on who you are. It depends on who your kids are as to where you go from here.
Well, and I think it depends on the village that you have. Single parenthood doesn't have to be the devastation that we attribute to it.
Yeah. Now, I just want to talk about that and then come back to the village. Okay, just for a second. I want to emphasize, and this is not about, there's no blaming or shaming or judging or anything here, but when we look at the data, there is absolutely no doubt that things are harder for kids who are raised in single-parent families. We know that in terms of, when you've got...
Well, they've got the odds stacked up against them before they've even walked out the door.
If there are two parents, there's more parenting happening, assuming the family is functioning at a half-decent level. Two parents means that there are more people to do parenting and more parenting that will happen. But we know that there's fewer financial resources. The data shows
time restraints.
Pretty clearly that
supervision,
income, education. In fact, I've just found something from the Brookings Institute, which says that children raised by single mothers are more likely to fare worse on a number of dimensions, including school achievement, social and emotional development, health and success in the labour market. They're at greater risk of parental abuse and neglect, especially from live-in boyfriends who are not their biological fathers. They're more likely to become teen parents and less likely to graduate from high school or college. I mean, it's a pretty sorry story when you look at the data. It says children who end up in single-parent families as the result of death, though, that is the death of one of their parents, don't have the same poor outcomes as children who are raised by single parents due to a divorce or out of wedlock birth. Maybe because death, unlike divorce or out of wedlock child rearing, is more likely to be a random event, not connected to the attributes or temperaments of the parents. And the Institute of Family Studies says for children who come from single parent families, the verbal environment consists of hearing roughly 600 words an hour. In comparison, children in intact families might hear more than an average of 2,000 words, roughly 3.5 times more per hour. By the age of 3, the cumulative vocabulary of the child living in the single-parent family is 500 words, far below the 1,100-word cumulative vocabulary possessed by a child from an intact family. The effects of this difference accumulate, resulting in the 30 million word gap at age 5. This early gap of basic skills tends to persist through life, leading to economic inequality and social immobility. Like, there's just one thing after another. And again, I'm saying this with only looking at the data, not trying to be horrible at all. But I want to do this specifically to highlight the point that this really comes down to the stuff that we're going to talk about in the second half of the podcast. So if you are raising children and you've got an absent parent, whether they're in the home or not, whether there's mental health issues, whether it's alcohol or drug abuse, whether it's been a divorce, you're doing it on your own, there are certain things that you can do to make sure that your kids don't experience the risk factors, that the gap is closed and that your children can thrive.
It's all about the village.
The village, yeah.
You know, it reminds me of that research that you talked about, the woman who followed the kids in Hawaii.
Oh, okay. So this is Emmy Werner. She's a sociologist, started a study in the mid-1950s, finished in the 1990s. And there are a lot of kids there from socially disadvantaged homes, single-parent homes, families where dad was in prison or sometimes even mum was in prison. There was alcohol and or drug use and abuse. There was all kinds of challenges, intergenerational poverty, blah, blah, blah. I mean, just a pretty rough story. About a third of those kids thrived. The 1/3 who thrived compared to the 2/3 who just followed the same unhealthy patterns of their parents. The 1/3 who thrived had one single adult, one caring adult, one adult who was there for them no matter what. Often not a parent, often a school teacher or a church leader or a scoutmaster or one of the guys down at the local surf club or a neighbor or an auntie or an uncle or a grandparent, just somebody who was always there for them.
It's just so powerful. And so if we find ourselves with deficits, then building our village to find people who can support those deficits, who actually bring to the table their strengths that fill those gaps in beautiful synergistic ways.
I want to ask you a question. It's a hard question, and I should have asked you before we started recording, but if the podcast suddenly cuts out, everyone will know that I'm going to ask you a different question instead. You were raised by a mum who has learned a lot and changed a lot over the years. But while you were being raised, when you were a child, I think it might be fair to say that because of the trauma from her childhood and the issues that she was working through, you were in some ways raised by a parent who kind of fits the description that Kate in the email has brought up. That is, absent and dealing with all sorts of head stuff. Did this village idea, I mean, I partly know the answer because I'm part of your life, and so I know at least part of the answer is yes, but to what extent did this village idea impact you?
I've always felt like I've had a village. When I was really young, we lived in New Zealand where my mum's from, and we had a lot of extended family, and I was the eldest, and as a result, my grandparents definitely had favourites, and I was one of them.
Which is nice.
And I knew that, and I felt valued, and I felt seen, and I felt heard, and I felt validated, all of those things. And so even when my mum wasn't able to be there for me, there were always adults in my life who just literally loved on me. My great-grandfather is one of my most favourite human beings of all time. And you talk about, you know, these soft eyes and making sure that when the kids walk in the room that your face lights up. And my great-grandfather did that for me in every moment of his life. And even now, as an adult, there are a handful of people in my life who I would consider parental figures. And
well, I remember there was one lady that you used to just call mum.
Yeah.
Jill. You just called her mum.
And even now, there's a lady, she's in her 70s. I show up on her doorstep and it's like I just made her day. Her whole face lights up. She picks up the phone and there is so much joy in her voice because she's hearing from me. And she listens, that she recognizes that that's the gift that she can give me, is just a place to drop my bundle for half an hour and chat with her. And I love her for it.
The importance of relationships outside of the home cannot be understated. So, Kate, I hope that that's useful. The other thing to remember, though, is relationships inside the home are so important. And the experience of Kate and also your experience and the experience of so many people who have either been raised in a home where they were missing a parent or the parent was present but not really emotionally available. The relationships that are happening inside the home, I think, may be even more important than what you've just described. As a parent, the most important thing you can do is be there. Just be there. And I don't know that it needs a whole lot more conversation other than the ability to listen, the ability to be present, the ability to tuck the kids in at night, the ability to give them the safety and the security that you feel like you're lacking.
I think sometimes kids put us on a pedestal when they're young. They think that we have all the answers.
Right.
And we kind of live into that mentality. As the adults in the space, we think that we should have all the answers.
Yeah.
And in the early days, we kind of can have most of the answers, but the problems get bigger as our little people grow. And the reality is we don't have all the answers. But what I have been learning and we've been learning and discovering together is that my job is actually not to have all the answers. My job isn't to fix it all. My job is just to listen and provide a safe space so that when my kids are struggling, they can literally just drop their bundle. They can bring it to me and say, this is too heavy to carry. And for a brief moment of time, we can just hold each other.
Kate, we're going to leave it there. I don't know a better way to finish this podcast than to say that. If you have questions that you would like to ask us, we're more than happy to answer them. Podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. We will do our very best to be useful, to make your family flourish and to make your family happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au to get in touch, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or at happyfamilies.com.au.